today for this economic update, and I want to give a huge thank you to Addition Financial for making all of this happen. My name is Jalen Brown. I'm a finance major and the chair for the College of Business Student Ambassadors. So the coronavirus pandemic has affected pretty much every business in Central Florida and across the country. That's caused some big changes for the state of the economy and how we spend our money. So I want to welcome our two panelists who are here to help us make sense of everything that's going on in the world and how COVID-19 is affecting our economy. First, we have Dr. Sean Snaith, who is the director of the UCF Institute for Economic Forecasting. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Snaith.
My pleasure.
Of course. And then we have Dr. Paul Jarley, who is the dean of the UCF College of Business. Glad to have you, Dean Jarley.
Pleasure to be here, Jalen.
Great. So let's jump right on in. Our first question is for Dr. Snaith. Looking at both Orlando and Florida, what do you think will be the biggest challenges on the road to economic recovery?
I think fear is going to be the biggest challenge. This notion that we could just turn off large segments of our economy like a light switch and then flip it back on and everything would go back to the way it was before, I think is not how this is going to play out. The longer the public health measures are in place, the more severe the recession will be, but it's also shaping the path of recovery once it's done. And so, how many people are going to be willing, once we open things up, to sit in a middle seat on an airplane? How many people are going to be willing to stand in line to ride on Harry Potter or Star Wars? I think that's going to be one of the biggest challenges. And the science, I think, can help address some of that. The more we know about the virus, exactly how, what is the fatality rate of exposure to the virus? We don't have a grip on that yet. I think businesses will, do things to try to ease people's concerns. I think hand sanitizer stations are here to stay. I did hear Disney talking about potentially taking guests' temperatures once they open up before letting them in the park. So, these kind of things I think could help in the early going.
All right, that's really interesting. Our next question is for Dean Jarley. For our graduating seniors who are about to join the workforce, what do you think employers will be looking for in new hires after this pandemic?
Well, honestly, I don't think that they're going to be looking for things that are very different than they were before the pandemic. There's been surveys of employers and recruiters for 50 or 60 years asking what qualities they want in new graduates, and that list really hasn't changed very much. They want people who are good communicators. They want them to solve problems. They want them to work well with others. If I was going to throw one thing in that I think might be a recency effect here is people who can show that they're adaptive, given everybody's had to adapt a bit during this crisis, might get pushed up a little bit in the queue here. But I don't really think the qualities that employers are going to be looking for are going to change. Some industries are going to come back quicker than others. And so there might be some very specific knowledge that might be more important or not. But I think, the thing that's most important for our graduates is twofold. One, I think it's going to be much more important for them to do research on companies. The stack of applications are going to be bigger. It's going to be harder to stand out in it. You need to look for ways to kind of stand out in it. And then the other thing here is to be persistent. It's going to be harder. There's no question about that. But we will get on the other side of this. I agree with Sean that, frankly, I think Florida might be lagging in a recovery because we're so tourist dependent. And that tourism industry is probably going to come back after a number of other things come back. One, because people don't have money to spend on tourism. And two, a lot of tourist activities are large group kinds of activities. And that's going to be a challenge for people. They're going to be reluctant to do that at first. So those industries might be slower here. Higher ed might be slower here. I mean, you've been on campus, right? We're the antithesis of social distancing. So until we're going to be able to find a way maybe to do some of that same testing Sean's talking about and convince people that it's safe to come back to campus, it's going to be a problem. And I don't think there's any question about
All right, thank you. I totally agree. I feel like it's going to be rough, but we're going to get through this. We need to stay optimistic. So we're going to go over back to Dr. Snaith for the third question. This pandemic is having a huge impact on small businesses. We know that the White House is taking action to offer some relief, but what do you think still needs to happen to keep small businesses from running out of money?
Well, they need to refund the payroll protection program, these loans for small businesses to allow them to keep people on their payrolls during the time of these public health measures. It ran out very quickly, and it's now become a kind of a political football. But in the meantime, every day that goes by, another small business isn't going to survive these shutdowns. So those measures to help them, and then really the best and biggest thing to help small businesses is to open the economy back up again. Disney and Delta Airlines will come out on the other side of this pandemic. It's the small hair salon or the little family diner that doesn't have access to capital markets. It isn't sitting on reserves that they can stay in business. And so I think, and when we do get to the other side of the pandemic, some of the businesses that were here before it all started will no longer be with us.
Well said, Dr. Snaith. We're going to go ahead and turn it back over to Dean Jarley for this next question. Do you see working from home becoming more common as a result of this new normal? And what other changes do you see happening to this country's work culture?
Crystal balls are dangerous. Sean knows that better than I do. I think I'm still in the camp that it's going to be short term, quite honestly, that there aren't going to be that many long-term changes as a result of this. We were talking before we came on here. Work through Zoom is miserable, quite frankly. You're on it all day. It's better than no communication. It's better than a phone communication, but it's still really inefficient. I mean, there's a reason why people go to work. And I don't think you're going to see huge changes in that long term. In the short term, you might, again, because of the public health reasons. But I think in terms of the actual functioning, that's going to return as quickly as it can. Frankly, for a lot of people, it's going to be when their kids are going to be able to go back to school. Let's not forget that a lot of people right now have to be both employees and daycare folks. And, it might be a while before that comes back. Most states have already said, primary and secondary school is over for the year. Then there's going to be the issue of, can you get daycare during the summer, depending upon how the pandemic is playing out. So to me, those changes in kind of family life are going to have to take place before you're going to see everybody returning back to work. But I don't know, you see a lot of articles out there right now that start out with how the coronavirus is going to change, fill in the blank forever. Today is Tuesday, is that right? So yes, I would call that overreaction Tuesday, quite honestly, and we'll just see. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, there's something dystopian about Zoom. I think it's a nice stopgap measure. But I think the trends in terms of telecommuting and, flexibility, working from home, those were with us. And I don't think we're all suddenly going to say we know nobody needs an office anymore. There's something that's lacking when you're interacting over the computer that is there when you're in the same room with people. And so I think and well, like all coverage, nothing's ever going to be the same. It's all very dramatic, and but once we know more about the virus, once we have good therapeutic treatments, and then eventually there'll be a vaccine. Seasonal flu didn't really change our lives that much. I mean, let's be clear, and this will just be another element of your seasonal flu shot eventually. And so, to proclaim that this is, some sort of transformational event, that, nothing will be the same again, I think is a bit too far. I mean, hopefully the public health policy making won't be the same going forward, because it took very little into account in terms of the costs of these measures, and a lot of people are suffering as a result.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's the same with us students, especially with that Zoom point that both of you guys made. College over Zoom, totally not the same. We can't really collaborate at all with each other, socialize with each other, and it's so much harder to reach out to these professors as well. But we all just can't wait to get back to school.
But Jalen, right? I mean, a lot of education and learning is social, and that's true at work too, right? And that's sort of the missing element.
Definitely. All right. Well, for our last question, I'd like to turn it back over to Dr. Snaith. So people have obviously been stuck at home for the past month, and that's been changing their spending habits. So what kind of businesses are actually doing well during this pandemic? And where are some opportunities for economic growth after the public health measures ramp down?
Well, I mean, obviously, online merchants have been doing well. I mean, Amazon's been a big beneficiary of this lockdown, and I imagine toilet paper manufacturers have also enjoyed it as well. One of the inexplicable elements of this whole thing, in my mind, but I think when things open back up, I'm looking forward to getting a haircut. I'm looking forward to sitting in a restaurant and eating. I'm looking forward to going to the beach. I'm looking forward to shorter lines in the theme parks for a while. I mean, I think all the things that people have been denied that were sort of a regular part of our lives are going to be the things that people are hungry for. All those nail salons are going to be packed, and well, not packed, but people are going to be eager to get out there and do that. So, with the exception, I think, and Dean Jarley touched on this earlier, is how quickly are people going to be willing to attend a football game at a stadium or get on a packed airplane. I think that will be measured, but the more we learn about the virus, the more data that we get, the better these models become, or at least the more accurate they become. And it also takes away this sort of fear of the unknown. This was being treated as a result of some of those early projections as, this horribly lethal thing that if you came in contact with it, it was over. And I've been watching the numbers for several months, and looking globally, the number of cases, the number of deaths, it should have been a non-event in some ways, but it was sort of snowballed by some projections and then hyped up. And then once that fear sets in, you got people snitching on someone because they're in the park and they're not supposed to. And, I just saw a news headline, Tom Brady was spotted in a park in Tampa, not that he ever followed the rules, but, so it just kind of snowballed into this thing. And we've got 24/7 media, social media amplifying all this. And I don't know. I think people will be ready to get back to normal. I mean, those that have lost jobs and don't have income, obviously their spending is going to be constrained. But for other people that have been able to continue to work, I think, and have been trapped with their, loved ones in the same building, people are going to be ready to get out and get a break. So I think we'll see a bounce back that's actually a lot stronger than some people are thinking.
Well said.
I have to ask. Okay, sorry, Jalen, but I think there's a lot of pent-up demand, particularly around social activity. And maybe you and I are the only two people, Sean, who talk about this anymore. But we just added $2 trillion to the national debt, and we've just gotten started there. What's your reaction to that?
Mixed. Interest rates are unbelievably low, right? You know, in times of global crisis, and the money just pours into U.S. government bonds because it is a flight to safety. And, you know, so much so that at one point during the pandemic, the 1 and 3 year treasury bills had negative interest rates. People were paying the government so that they could lend the government money. I mean, the upside of this, deficit spending is at least we're financing at a low rate. The downside is it's getting stacked on top of $23 trillion before any of this began. And as you said, it's not over in terms of the deficit spending. And you get your $1,200 check and you spend it and that's it. But that debt remains. You know, there was some talk, I thought, about an infrastructure bill maybe getting pushed through. And well, you know, one, maybe politically it's now feasible in the midst of a crisis, and two, at least we have something to show for that debt at the end of the day. And there is an infrastructure deficit, but yeah, $4 trillion. I think people are looking at the deficit for this year alone, and at some point, that's going to have to be addressed.
Yeah, and just so you're clear, Jalen, that's going to be your problem more than it's going to be mine and Dr. Snaith's problem.
Oh yeah, I know that for a fact. I know.
Unfortunately.
All right. Well, Dr. Snaith and Dean Jarley, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer all these questions about the state of our economy.